Alright, this is a fly that I've kind of been holding in my back pocket for a little while. You've seen some pictures of it, but it's probably the most realistic sculpin that I've tied. And really, I've been working on a realistic sculpin for probably over a year now. And so I'm confident that I'll probably change this pattern up down the road, but for now it's a very functional sculpin pattern and had some really good success with it. Anyway, I've got an Allen B200 in the vise. It's size 6, and I'm going to use 2 different threads for this. I'm going to start out with some 6/0 uni thread in white, and then I'll switch over to some GSP once I get to the head. But first of all, what I'm going to do is just kind of start at the middle point of the hook and start dressing my hook. I'm going to tie in some holographic cactus chenille. Now this is going to be an olive fly, and this is going to be the underbelly. So if you want more of like a completely olive pattern, you can change your chenille to an olive color. Really, the color and the style of chenille doesn't really matter, so just use whatever you like. I'm using this holographic cactus chenille because I like the properties of it. So I'm only going to advance my thread about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to wrap the chenille up to that. Once I get up there, I'm going to tie it off, but I'm not going to trim it. I'm just going to move that chenille back out of the way. At this point, I'm going to take some articulation wire, and I'm just going to tie that in right on top of the hook shank. And if I were just to tie it down over the whole thing, it might pull out. In fact, my field tests with this have shown that it will pull out unless you double it over and glue it. So that's what I'm going to do. And as you see, this fly is designed to ride hook point up, and it kind of slithers along the bottom of the stream. And so it'll start to make more sense once we get further into the fly. Another thing is, Curtis and I have both been using a product. This isn't anything that we sell. I'm just showing you because I really like the properties of it. It's a really thin super glue. This is from Hobby Lobby, but as you'll see, just a tiny amount onto that thread will soak right in. You got to be really careful with it. So once I have that down, I'll advance my thread about to, say, right here. Take my chenille forward. This time I will cut it off. Now you can vary the weight of this fly based on how many tungsten beads you add into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some 3.8 millimeter tungsten beads, and I'm going to add in about 3 of them. Now this sculpin, I wanted to have a pretty flat, more realistic head, and it's hard to do that if you have barbell eyes up front. And I know that there are other flies that are tied with beads along the belly, but it's tied with a thick monofilament loop, and they're made to kind of rattle back and forth. These beads will kind of be tucked up under the fly, kind of hidden, and they're just there to add weight to the fly. So as I put these on, the thick or the larger diameter hole on the back of the beads is the one that I slide over first. So when I pull these forward, it's going to have the smaller hole facing forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that wire over and tie it down. And once you have it tied down a little bit, I like to give it another snug pull, and that will seat those beads right along that belly. So I'm going to take that and double it over, trim it, and glue it. Okay, now I don't want the tail to be super long. And the other thing is, on a lot of our other flies we've used Magnum zonker, but you really want the back part of this fly to be really slim. And so I'm going to measure maybe the length of the shank of the hook, and that's how long I want my tail to be. And I'm just going to come in here and puncture the leather strip through the hook. Then I'll take the hook out of the vise, turn it upside down, and replace it into the vise. Okay, now it's important to leave this as slender as possible because we're going to be tying in a bunch of stuff up here. So I'm going to take my thread back right where I tied those beads off, pull my zonker strip up, and create a tie-in point. Just like that, and trim that off. Now this olive is pretty bright, so I'm going to tone it down. I'm going to kind of come in here and touch it up with a brown marker a bit. Alright, now is where the fly gets pretty interesting. As you have seen, if you've watched the Sculpito video, the fins are made, the pectoral fins you want to stay pretty thick, but the fins on the Sculpito are designed with rubber legs, and it does a pretty good job of keeping a wide profile. But I wanted something that was more realistic. So what I did is I started building fins out of Bruiser Blend dubbing. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to take some olive brown in the long version of Bruiser Blend. This is the original recipe, Bruiser Blend dubbing. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to kind of flatten it out like this, preen it out. You can see how nice that stays together. And then I'm going to kind of take the middle point and make kind of a bow tie. I'm going to take this and I'm going to tie that in. I'm going to make one fin out of that piece of Bruiser Blend. So after I have that tied in, I'm going to double it over and tie it onto itself. And so I can fan that out. I'll take it out of the vise so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see that's one fin that I've got tied in, and you'll see I'll trim that down and we'll glue it up nice. So once I've got one side tied in, I'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I've got two pretty unruly fins, oversized, pretty big clumps of Bruiser Blend here. And now is when the fun starts. So the idea here is I'm going to take some UV resin. I use the Flow from Loon, and I'm going to take, I think this will be easier if I show you this way, but I'm essentially going to take this and make stripes of UV resin along this. So what it does is it makes those stay wide, and I can create fins out of it. The other thing is I'm really going to add a lot of UV resin right here at the tie-in points for these to make it so that they stay somewhat rigid. The idea behind making lines in the fins is when they get wet, if there are lines, they will still kind of curve back and they'll move a little bit better in the water. So I will start adding those lines, and hopefully you can follow what I'm doing here. So first, again, I'm going to start out with that pretty heavy dose right here at the tie-in point. I'm actually going to advance my thread forward. Let it soak in really well, and now I'm going to tag it. Now I'm going to move over just a few millimeters. I'm going to pull it tight a little bit and make a line of UV resin. And now I'll tag that. And I keep going along till I have about 3 or 4 lines. Alright, so now you can see I have one of them done. And you can see how it kind of moves all as one. Okay, now I'll do the other one and I'll show you how I trim them up. Alright, so our fins are glued. Now they're ready to trim. So the idea is I'm going to come in at an angle and trim these, and then move up and trim them again, move up and trim again, and that makes a jagged edge along that fin. So again, trim it, move up, trim it, you'll get the picture. Alright, so those are our, let's see, I'll get the vise back. Those are our fins. Alright, so now I'm going to build a head, and we're going to use bruiser blend, but we're going to build a head similar to how a wool head would be built or applied. Before we do that though, we're going to take just a really thin amount of bruiser blend. I'm going to tie it in through the middle of those 2 fins. We'll just double this over. Tie it in just like that. And then the same thing on the bottom. Now when I tie the bottom piece on, I'm not going to double it over because then it will be too much bruiser blend in there. So I'll just trim it off. Okay, so for now our fly is looking like this. Basically looks like a dog puked on the vise. At this point I'm going to take some black 100 denier GSP and I'm going to tie that in. I'm going to finish the fly with it just because I'm going to really be torquing down on some of these clumps of bruiser blend that I'm going to tie in. Okay, so I've got a really generous clump of bruiser blend. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut that right in half. Just about like that. And so what I'll do is I'll take the trimmed end and I'll face it back and I'll stick it on the fly just about right about there, and I'm going to tie it in just like I'm stacking deer hair. So tie it in right on top of the vise or right on top of the hook, and then I'll turn it upside down and do the same thing with the other clump. So a couple loose wraps and then pull down really tight on this GSP and it will lock it in really nice. After I do that, just like with deer hair, I'm going to preen it back and kind of jam it into the other clumps and bring my thread forward. And then I should be able to get away with just doing one more clump just like that. Okay, now this is just a mess, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, I like using my tweezers for this, but you could take a bodkin or even a comb. I'll probably go over it with my comb. But I'm just going to come in here and pick out the bruiser blend. Kind of get it all nice and teased out. Get it ready for a haircut essentially. Okay, so once we're to this point, you gotta have pretty dang sharp scissors for this. I like a brand new pair of Dr. Slick razor scissors. And I'm going to come in the first little haircut that I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure my scissors stay at a uniform angle all the way around the hook. And a rotary vise really helps with this. So I'll just start cutting and rotate as I cut. So you see all that bruiser blend kind of stays right on there like that. Now I can just take it and take it off, or I can brush it out, and then I'll just keep going up with that same angled cut. Okay, now we're looking good. So with just 2 basic cuts, I have kind of the shape that I want to go with. Now you can see with this profile now, how it's nice and flat, how I'm squishing it with my fingers, I wouldn't be able to have that nice of a profile had I used barbell eyes. Okay, now this is the part where, you know, I was really debating on what type of eye to put on it. And the type of eye that I ended up putting on this fly really made it look like a little mouse, I guess, in the water. But I tried a bunch of the stick-on eyes, you know, Clear Cure Goo, the Montana Fly eyes, and I couldn't find anything that I liked very much. So what I did is I ended up just taking a black marker and marking where I wanted my eyes. So one about right here, and I'll really saturate that bruiser blend with that black marker. And then I want one about right here. You see where I made my marks. So instead of sticking on eyes, I'm actually just going to build up eyes and make them out of UV resin. So I'm going to use the thin first. So the key is I'm going to flatten out my head again and put some in there and kind of jam it down into where that eye is going to sit and let it soak in a little bit to create a base. So if you create a good base, they won't ever pop off. They're basically glued into the inner fibers of the fly. Do the same thing over here. Now what I'm going to do is switch over to the thick, and I'll just put a glob of the thick on top of where I put the thin, and what that will do is it'll kind of bubble up and make nice, perfectly round eyes. You can see how cool that looks now. That's a super easy way to make just awesome little beady eyes. You can see how that looks. Now, you know, because sculpins are pretty mottled and have a bunch of different colors, I'm just going to take a brown marker and a black marker and just kind of give it the business. All up in the fins and underneath. And then on the belly, I like to take a yellowish marker and just kind of come in here and tag the belly with a lighter color. And the bruiser blend really takes to other colors really well. So it takes marker pretty good. Alright, so there you have it, the Belly Scratcher Sculpin. I'll go get it wet so we can see what it really looks like. This is the end product. So I'll show it to you against my hand, but as you'll see, it's kind of got those fins stay nice and wide, and the head will actually undulate in the water more and give it kind of a bigger, thicker profile. But I fish with these, the eyes stay on the whole time. It keeps its form in the water probably better than any sculpin that I've fished. And the best part is, because of where the beads are, you can barely see them now, it really slithers over rocks well. And every time it hits, but it lands and rides perfect every time. But anyway, give that a try. Keep your eyes open for the shorter version of Bruiser Blend, and that makes that, you know, you saw that I wasted quite a bit of Bruiser Blend on this tie, but with the shorter version you won't go through quite as much.